All right, welcome. So imagine you're going to the circus. A new circus is coming to town, all right? And there's different ways you might hear about it. One way you might hear about it is from a really nice advertisement on TV, right? Or on your phone or whatever. And it's got music and it's really polished. And you can tell they put a lot of thought into just crafting the perfect sculpted message. Nothing extra, just enough to get you to buy your ticket and go see the circus, right? You might also hear about the circus from your breathless friend. By the way, you're 10 years old in this scenario, okay? Your other 10-year-old friend runs up and he says, "You got to see this. The circus is coming." Okay, look, they got a trapeze. They got bears running around on balls. They got trapeze. They got fireworks. They have a shark in a tank that can read your mind. It's a new thing, right? There's different ways you might hear about it. In this scenario, the really polished advertisement, that's .NET Conf. That's coming up November 11th. It's going to be very focused. It's going to tell you just the basics enough to sell you .NET 10, okay? I'm your breathless 10-year-old friend, so excited about what I've seen in .NET 10. I'm going to show you way too much, okay? You're going to like some parts. You're not going to like other parts. Just enjoy the ride, get excited about .NET 10, okay? That's what I do. I can't do the polished thing. I got to show you I'm so excited about .NET 10, so let's dig in. Here are the kind of core areas we're going to look at things. We're going to start with Aspire. We're going to look briefly at Aspire. I'm not going to go super deep on Aspire because there's whole sessions. If you love Aspire, you're going to go see those sessions, right? This is Aspire in the context of .NET 10. Then we'll go into AI. Then we'll look at fundamentals. Fundamentals is my grab bag for everything that's not Aspire and AI, basically. So that's talking about runtime, SDK, but also other things that are important for .NET, like ASP.NET, MAUI, desktop apps, et cetera. But I'm not, those are not the huge focus areas, okay? And then we'll wrap up with tools, how you're going to get on .NET 10. So, Aspire, this is harder to describe than to fall in love with for me. It's difficult to say, okay, Aspire is neat because this and this and this. What I like about Aspire is it helps pull together different things in an application, make it easy to see what's going on, to run them, to dig in, get going quickly. All right? When I first saw Aspire, it was sold to me as it's for building big, enormous cloud-hosted apps, big distributed, Kubernetes, blah, 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 right? I thought, I'm not really doing that. I have an API and a front end and a database. So I don't really need that, right? But the truth is, Aspire is awesome for all these scenarios from really big to really small. So my default when I start a new project now is usually to think about just making an Aspire app from the beginning. So I'm able to observe, scale up, but also just try things out. Say, hey, maybe I'll throw Postgres in here. Nope, that didn't work. Goodbye, Postgres, right? So it's very easy to just develop and iterate quickly. So the things that you'll include in there, you've got an app host. Your app host is what ties the different parts together. That's where you say, yes, I've got a web front end, an API, and a database, right? And then you can later say, I want Kafka. You throw Kafka in there. There's also a CLI. So this is the Aspire CLI. You can manage everything without using it. You can just use .NET CLI tool, or you can use your standard project stuff. But the CLI is available. Honestly, I think that mostly appeals to people that aren't necessarily building purely .NET solutions, right? So if you're building, say, React and so, and you may have an API backend, developers you're working with may want to use that CLI. Also, integrations for tying in things like other services, and then a dashboard. Dashboard is a huge selling point. If all the Aspire had was a dashboard, I would love it, all right? So Aspire 9.0 shipped last November with .NET 9. It ships regularly. It's not on a very tight monthly schedule. So Aspire 9.5 just shipped. We're expecting a new one around the .NET 10 release. So in 9.5, we got things like command line tool, Aspire update and deploy. Single file app host. So this is the ability to not require an entire CS project or anything for your app host. You can just have apphost.cs and that's it. So this is great if you're working with, again, like you've got your React Dev front-end folks, or you've got people building with Python or whatever. You can just have your app host CS, and that's going to spin up and run everything. You don't need your whole project file and kind of complicating things when you don't need it. GenAI visualizer in the Aspire dashboard. We'll look at this a bit later. The idea here is that when you're building AI applications, you want to be able to see how many tokens am I using? What are the metrics here? And understand what's going on in your app from an AI point of view. And so that telemetry from AI is surfaced into the Aspire dashboard. One other neat thing here that stood out to me is console or container app job support. Honestly, this was a new one to me. So I didn't realize container apps can run jobs. And the idea here is similar to like an Azure function, where you'd spin up, you can run something that just runs to completion and ends, or you can have it run on a schedule or a trigger. So that can run in a container app, and that container app job support's added in 9.5. So then I bugged Maddie. I said, give me the what's coming up. So there's actually a roadmap discussion. And the discussion goes into depth about everything that's planned, where they're at on it. You can follow along and argue with the team on that. But some of the neat things, like again building on the app host for things like Aspire and Init, et cetera. More networking. The networking is crucial for some features like dev tunnel support and other things, HTTPS everywhere, that sort of stuff. Adding in AI, and these are Maddie's words copied in exactly, so we got the more AI and more cloud. MCP is neat. Of course, you're seeing MCP everywhere. I've got a session tomorrow morning on AI, and we'll look at how you build MCP servers. But the quick way to think about MCP, if you're not as familiar with it, is just it's a way to add tools to a large language model. So when you're talking to Copilot and VS Code, you can call into the GitHub MCP, and you can say, look up this pull request and get the context, and now fix my code based on the issue on issue 358, right? So it's able to pull all that stuff together. I use it all the time. We're actually getting ready to ship .NET 10 RC2 probably today. And so I was in my hotel room this morning using the GitHub MCP in order to coordinate that. So you're going to see MCPs everywhere. We'll talk about that more in a bit. That is the very just high level on Aspire. Why did I even mention that? Okay, Aspire ships out of band with .NET 10, right? It's not, you're not going to wait till the big Aspire release that comes every November, because it's got to ship more often. It has integrations. It has you're looking for new features that are going to come out more regularly, and so it ships very, very often. However, there are two things that work together here. There are Aspire features that power .NET 10 features, and there are also .NET 10 features that power Aspire. So I mentioned the single file app support. That is a .NET 10 feature. So if you want to run, apphost.cs and project list support, that is a .NET 10 feature. So the two are very mixed together. So you can't really think logically about a .NET 10 release without considering the background of what is and the context of what's in Aspire. All right, so AI is another big pillar. Of course, you're hearing nothing but AI all the time lately. It's moving quickly, and .NET is very focused on that as well, of course. So we're doing what you'd expect .NET to do, right? Which is to build the libraries, to build the templates, to build the support so that you can use the tools, the language features, you can integrate AI into your application in a way you're comfortable with, right? So I think context-wise, nothing that .NET is doing is working super hard to steal Python developers and convert them to .NET developers, right? That really wouldn't make sense. We're not like going out and trying to poach people. What we're trying to do is empower .NET developers to take advantage of AI in your applications. So if you're building AI apps, if you're building a new app, you can start from the beginning with AI templates. You can start building with AI. If you are have existing apps, which I'm sure you all do, you can integrate using libraries like MEAI, and you can pull that stuff into your existing app. So Microsoft Extensions for AI is kind of the big one. This is a NuGet package, and there's also templates that are built on top of that. You can think of those as primitives, which actually I have another slide for that in a second, so I'll wait for that. We also have vector data. Shai here has a talk on this yesterday, I think. But the idea here is to add in vector data support into .NET. The way I think of this, both MEAI and vector data are kind of similar to Entity Framework. So the idea is abstracting away. If I want to use vector data in my application, I don't need to go get the Quadrant SDK, right? I don't need to get the ChromaDB or the Pinecone SDK and read all their docs. I can use vector data annotations on my classes. I can say this is a vector data. This is, it uses cosine similarity and a block size or a bit size of 1536, which they use for some reason, right? So you can set all those sorts of things, and use them natively in your .NET applications. MCP server, I mentioned that earlier. So we have a template. And we have an SDK, the C# SDK for MCP. So that's Model Context Protocol. And again, the idea there is this is a way for a large language model to communicate with a tool, and it uses the context. So that's the important thing. It's able to communicate using context and pass that back and forth. So an example, which I'll show in my talk tomorrow morning, another advertisement here, is you can create an MCP that says, go look up these orders or get me a random number, right? And so you've written C# code that exposes something. That C# code may call an API, right? May call an existing REST API that you've got. And instead of having to try and get your LLM to call into your REST API and write those custom bridges, you can create an MCP that's a protocol that the LLM knows how to call, and it's going to be able to call directly into your C# code and then either execute your C# code or it's going to run a REST query, et cetera, right? AI templates, I mentioned those. I'm a big fan of of templates in general. You'll see kind of different approaches for learning things in .NET, and sometimes we, point you to the docs and say, here's, take a console app and drop these NuGet packages in and write this code. Some people learn that way, and that's awesome. What I like to do is file new project, run the apps, and then look at the code and say, when I change this, does it change on the screen? How did this button get wired up, right? So I like to kind of start with something that works and tear it apart. And so that's kind of what those templates do. I thought of these templates a bit, like one of these templates ingests PDFs. It has 2 PDFs, and so I taught a workshop on that where we dropped in 20 more PDFs and we ingest those. And after the talk, after the workshop, I talked to someone and they said, this is great. We have a manufacturing company that runs on PDF. We have thousands of PDFs, and that's where our entire inventory is. And so I said, well, that's awesome. So, PDFs, that is a good example. But of course, data ingestion isn't just PDFs. It can be anything else where your data lives, right? So that could be text, or it could be another custom file type or whatever. Finally, another really important one that we don't talk about enough is model evaluation. So when you're calling into, when you're using AI in your application, there is a bit of randomness involved there. There's actually 2 parts of randomness. One is that large language models are a lossy format, right? So it's trained on tons of information from all over the internet, from tons of code, whatever, and it identifies common patterns, and it predicts the next thing. It predicts the next token. So if you say, it's a great day, let's go to this is Scott Hanselman's example, you hear him say, let's go to it might say park, it might say zoo, but it might say, jail, or, spaghetti factory, whatever, we don't know, right? And so some of the reasons those are different is which model you're using, but another is that there's a thing called temperature, which randomizes so that you don't get robotic text that does the same thing every time, right? So when you combine those, they make large language models very powerful, but also a bit random. And so that's why model evaluation is super important. So there are libraries in MEAI, so it's called Microsoft Extensions for AI Evaluations. They can be run in your project as Azure DevOps tasks. They can be run basically as like unit tests. And the idea is when you can give it just like a unit test, right? You'd say, when I ask this question, what is the output? So think of this when you're writing for your like your business application, and you say, when I process this order, what do I get back? When I ask for this HR question, what is the answer? And so you can verify the validity of that, right? So common things in MEAI, one is common AI abstractions. So again, the idea when I talked about vector databases, not having to use a specific thing for OpenAI and a different one for Grok and a different one for Azure Foundry, et cetera, right? We use an iChat client, and you're able to use that iChat client, inject it, use it just like you would use like an iLogger or like a database with Entity Framework, right? So you're able to create and use those things, and then all you need to do is change your connection to your back end. What is your endpoint and what is your key? And then it's able to talk to a different one. So for instance, I use GitHub models to develop locally. And then when I deploy to Azure, I use Azure Foundry. And I'm able to do that just by changing my endpoint and key, right? There's also standard middleware that you're used to using and integrates well into your application. So think of things like caching. Caching is great in a web app. It's also great in an AI application where you don't want to waste tokens and spend money, right? We talked about vector databases, and we talked a bit about the interoperability and extensibility through being able to talk to different providers. All right, I'm going to move on through this. All right, so I want to pop real quickly to a little demo I've got running. This is built from, if I go in here, I'm going to go to, so I'm running VS 2026 or Insiders. So if I go here, create a new project, I'll show you how I created the project. We'll jump to the running project. So this is the AI chat web app. There's also another one for an MCP console app, right? So if I create the web app, it's going to ask me a few things. Name, of course, blah, blah, blah. This is the important stuff I want to point out. So if we look at, it's the giant zoom. So which framework? We have different AI service providers. So these are the ones that are built in. All of these use that iChat client return. And there's samples in there for writing other iChat clients. So it's a common abstraction you can use against them. Notice in here, too, this has Olama, which is great because you can use for local development if you've got a powerful computer, good graphics card, then you're able to use that. And then for vector store, so this has, I don't know if I can scroll. No. There we go. I should be using Zoom It. That's what I'll do. Yeah. So for instance, in here we've got local on disk, which is very simple. This is just JSON files. But there's also Quadrant, which is built in, and Azure AI Search. So this is great for local and also in production. Quadrant is a powerful vector database, works pretty well. All right, let's jump to the end of this. So we'll go to here. So I've got this running. And now if I go into the app, I can say something like, I am lost, help. So what this has done, this project, literally you can install this template, create the app. It ingests PDFs. I've got 2. As I mentioned, you can put in as many others as you want. It puts those into a vector database. When I ask the question, I am lost, help, that goes to a large language model. So that's the AI provider. That AI provider is then figuring out what are you trying to do. And then it's using that to do queries into my vector database. So in the vector database, that's funny here, it thinks I'm in Canada, so that's neat. But then based on that, it's going to query the vector database. Now, some of the products I have ingested have like a GPS watch. So I think there it is. So it's linking to, I've ingested all these different ones. It's got a survival kit, it's got a GPS watch, right? And I click on this, and it's going to take me right to that. So the neat thing here we're seeing is that this is combining together a vector database and a large language model. So this is a great way to get started and build quickly with AI applications in .NET. I've got a session, again, my last ad for this, tomorrow morning where we'll go deeper. So that is working with a large language model. Where we're going in the future is agentic apps, all right? So if you think of the kind of progress of AI applications, we started with the chatbot. The original chatbot I'm familiar with, I didn't like because it wasn't useful. I would ask it things and it didn't help, and finally I'd say, get out of here, and I would go do the work myself. Eventually, with GPT and other advances, we started getting useful chats, right? But chat isn't the only paradigm we should be using for working with large language models. Sometimes, some applications may be doing AI that runs in the background, and you'll never actually see the chat interface. You may not even actually know that there's a large language model involved. So that's the sort of thing where maybe we're doing semantic search. Maybe we're starting off a workflow. I place an order, and the workflow goes in, and it coordinates large language models with other tools that are not AI, right, and combines that together and gets work done. So there's a whole variety of different patterns that we can use for that. And you'll notice here that I'm including Aspire on this as well. And that's because, like I mentioned, Aspire is super awesome for integrating this stuff together. And I did mention I was going to show that. So if we go into here, if we look at my traces, you'll see now this is this chat is using SignalR, and so it's got it's a little bit noisy. But I think if I scroll up here, I could maybe, if I was smarter, I'd filter this. This does have, there it is, 49 seconds, right? I can go into these. I can look, and it'll show me the different things in the resource. So if I look at my vector database, I can go in. I can look at the dashboard. I can also look at my OpenAI. I'll try one more time. I guess metrics is a little easier to bring up, right? So if I look at client operation duration, I can look at stuff in here as far as tokens. I'm going to give up pretty quick because I don't want to waste time. One other neat thing in here is that there's also Copilot is actually integrated into this dashboard. So I can ask it questions, and it'll go in and it'll figure out stuff based on explain this trace. There it is. I found it. I'm so excited about this, right? So you see all these little sparkles? Those are all AI things. And so this is actually where it's able to light up, and it's able to say, here's the system message, right? Here's the user message. So this is super. I just asked, how do I stay warm? But if we look at this is the entire system message that says, what are you doing, right? So this is great for debugging and building those applications on top of AI. So I love seeing that. One other thing, I mentioned the Copilot integration here. So I can say something like, analyze this trace. And there's a lot going on here, multiple calls and stuff like that. And so it's neat where Aspire, when you launch Aspire from a context that has Copilot set up. So if you run it from Visual Studio, or if you run it from VS Code and you're signed in, then Copilot pops up, and it's able to say things like, here's what you did, blah, blah, blah. And then I can say, what are best practices? What are this? What are that, right? And it can help me with that. So these are new features that have just come out recently in Aspire. All right, so we're talking about agentic applications. And so there has been support. This is the slide I would have basically spent all the time on up till last week. But now we've got this slide, which is fading in ominously slow, which is kind of neat, which is Microsoft Agent Framework. So Agent Framework is the Microsoft, this is Microsoft. Okay, we took our time, we figured out, we had a bunch of different teams that built different things, we made them all fight, and we settled on this. This is how we recommend you build agent frameworks across Foundry, different products, et cetera. So What this does, distilling that bullet points down to this, if you think of an agent, we've already got the concept of a model in chat, right? We've got our large language model. We're also wanting to add tools to that. So tools are ability to do something. That may be something like perform a database query, or it doesn't need to necessarily be AI-based, right? And then one other thing which is really important is context. And that's something that all our AI apps kind of have had to do in the past. If you look at any chat application, you look at that one that I just showed you earlier, it's maintaining a queue of all the questions that have been asked, right? And then after a while, we need to do things like chat reduction. We need to say, OK, this chat has thousands of characters. This is using way too many tokens. Now we need to reduce that down, right? So an agent is something that kind of encapsulates all those different things and can build those features out. If you've worked with semantic kernel or AutoGen in the past, you still can. Those things are still there. But the idea is that they're kind of converging on the agent framework, right? So this is, I had been kind of a little confused and struggling to keep up in the past. If you've looked at building things with AI in the past on .NET, it's like, do I use semantic kernel? Do I use AutoGen? Do I use MEAI? What do I do, right? And so the idea is, extensions for AI is that kind of like basic tools or basic like building blocks, and then agent framework is built on top of that. So as an example here, here's creating an agent. Okay. I have other examples that show creating an iChat client, and I kind of want to show that. I guess we'll just skip ahead. Assume creating a client that connects to an LLM backend is a couple of lines of code, right? I just say, here's my endpoint, here's my key, go create an iChat client. Now, this is wrapping that to create an agent. I can say, OK, your agent, you have a name. So you want to be able to identify an agent to create multiple different ones, have them working together. So I'm creating a writer. I'm giving them instructions, right? Then I'm creating another specialized agent, and I'm saying, OK, you are an agent that is an editor. So we had our writer. Now we want to be able to have the editor, and we give them the instructions of review, fix grammar, and enhance the plot. OK? And then we can combine those together into a workflow. So we can say, this is a sequential thing. First the writer writes, then the editor edits. We can assign them, then we can say run async, and we can say write a short story, right, and give it that prompt, and then write the output. Now I'll show you what I'm going over here is shamelessly stolen from my colleague Luis, and he wrote this post up. So this code is available, and even these here, right? So this is I work with him on the .NET AI team, and so he kind of put this together. This includes he included a sample app. So we'll take a look at that sample application. So I actually forked it because his client was written in JavaScript and HTML, and I wanted Blazor, and so I just did it. I added a couple other features. I'm running this in a code space. If you're not using code spaces, I recommend doing that. They're pretty handy in just for trying things out. So one nice thing about this code space is it sets things up using a GitHub token so for the GitHub model. So this is going to spin up, and then I'll say .NET run. We'll do project, source, app host. Okay. So remember I mentioned before, every app basically should be an Aspire app. This is an example. Luis built a pretty simple application, and he still did it with Aspire. And it's great because you're able to understand, diagnose it, see that dashboard, see what's going on. If a key's not set correctly, et cetera, you can dig in and you can see what's there, right? So this is spinning up. This will take just a second or two. So the context here is we're going to give it a prompt about what kind of story we want. The writer's going to write the story. The editor's going to edit the story. And then there's two other tools in here And the tools do things like formatting and assigning a title on it. So I've got that just about going. Cool. All right, so we'll run that. Again, these are really cool, the using CodeSpace, because it forward supports and everything. So I'm able to run this directly on GitHub, and then I'm browsing to it on my computer here. So bringing up the chat client, I'll say, write a story about a secret agent at Azure Dev Summit named Jimmy Bogard. Okay. So it initially, here, let's zoom that in a little bit. Oh, great. Come on now. I was so excited about this. Let's try it one more time. Now, if I did want to diagnose this, I could also look into here and dig in. Aspire should be checking that stuff. But OK. Write another story about Lisbon and Jimmy. I'll blame this on Jimmy if it doesn't run. Let's restart it. Okay. So the general idea, if it does run, we'll get to see a short little story. If it doesn't run, then we will assume it was supposed to run because it ran in my hotel room and it was super awesome. And but the idea is that it's hooking together multiple agents, right? A story about Lisbon. We'll leave Jimmy off in case he's jinxing us. OK. Initializing agents. So this is a simple example using a couple of agents doing some kind of small things. Timed out. So I'm guessing it's probably something with the key. I'll take another run at it in my talk tomorrow. But the idea is that you can tie together a lot of different agents that are doing different things. So if we look here, well, going just back to our, why is this not minimizing? Going back to the example of the workflow, we could have multiple workflow steps. This could be a long-running process with something like booking a flight or handling an order or something, right? So this is something that should execute in about 30 seconds. But you can think of a workflow process being something that could span like weeks, right? So that's the general idea there. You're going to hear more and more from Microsoft talking about agents and agentic operations and stuff, agentic apps. And I'm basically hearing and reading more and more about that. For a while, it was AI was just the chatbot, right? And now they're moving more towards having something that does something long-term for you. So a simpler example of this is like I've been using like M365 Copilot. I actually had it write up a 10-page report on what's new in .NET 10 for me just to read, right? I gave it a bunch of links to the docs, bunch of stuff, and then it wrote up a report. Some of that report was absolutely wrong. It like gave me some features that we shipped years ago. Other features, I pinged the PMs, and they're like, yeah, I don't really know what that's about there. But the agentic thing, anyways, was the idea, I guess, there. So, all right, so we've talked about Aspire and AI. Again, those are context of what we're shipping in November with .NET 10. So now let's talk about the fundamentals that kind of power that stuff. So one of the things is C# 14. I'm expecting if you were like way deep into C#, you probably saw Mads' talk. I'm going to talk about just some of the high-level things. So one is extension members. The idea with an extension, we've had like extension properties for a while. This adds in or extension methods. This adds in member support. So let's look at an example where here we're creating an isEmpty, right? And then we also create a first or default safe. So what's nice with that, or the way those are implemented, right? I'm having trouble reading. This is the code before. This is how we would write the code before. We would have a helper function, and then we would say, you know, first or default safe and pass the thing in, right? And now with an extension member, we're able to directly say something like, empty list.first-through-default safe. Now, why is that nice? Well, one thing is that you're able to, shorten the code a little bit. Fine. What I think is kind of nicer is the discoverability, right? So directly off my class, I'm able to say off the class dot do something. It's a little easier to reason about rather than to have to call into a function, right? A helper function. So neat. Another nice thing is null conditional assignment. So we've been able to read things conditionally in the past before, right? So we've been able to say like question mark dot to read from an order. But here we can just say instead of get current order, we can say customer question dot order equals blah, blah, blah. Now what's great is if there's no customer, this isn't going to fail, right? So I'm not having to make those null checks all over the place. So just a nice convenience feature. All right. So another feature that seems kind of small, although it's something I've been wanting for a really long time, but also powers things, right? So I mentioned before that ability to run an Aspire application as a single file. So this is that .NET run file.cs. So if we look at, so here, okay. So we'll say .NET or okay. So I'm just writing hello world into file.cs. Console write line file.cs, okay? So if we say cat, okay, single line in that file, right? Is that readable enough? Do I need to zoom some more? Good, okay. So now I can just do .NET run file.cs. So it's actually going to like do the standard things. It's building the project and running it, and I've got my hello world, right? And then it runs a little bit slow the first time. Next time I run it, it's faster because it's built. And then I could also say .NET project convert file.cs. So the idea here is they call it the grow up story. I start with a file. The file starts getting longer, right? Maybe it's a script. Maybe I'm learning C#, and then later I want more in there. Maybe it's an Aspire project, and now my Aspire app has grown, and I've got this enormous file.cs, and I want to refactor it. So now I can do this project convert file.cs. I can say okay, Lisbon. I think it may because my directory wasn't empty, then it made it. Normally when I've run this in the past, I think it just basically created it based on the name of the file. So let's see, I don't know what's happening here. But all it does is spit out a very simple CS proj file, right? So, I don't think we need to see a 3-line CS proj file. I'll move on. But we can look at a bigger Aspire example, right? So this is super powerful to be able to do this in, 10, 12 lines of code. So you'll see at the top, we call out the SDK. So this is great for being able to say, yeah, I want to run Aspire 950. Then I can pull in a package. So this is where I want to pull in an integration for Redis. So I can call that out. So this is where you put in your NuGet package references in your CS proj, right? Then I can reference a project using that pound project. And then I can just write my app host directly here, and it's got everything it needs to do. So, this is useful for some areas. It's great for like scripting. What we think about it for is for polyglot developers. That's funny that I messed up saying the word polyglot, but polyglot developers that are not necessarily .NET focused and just want to spin up an Aspire app, whatever. It's useful for scripting. It's also useful for new language learners, right? We've, in the past, .NET has kind of had to compete with other languages where you can just, write Python or whatever in the command line. So it's great to be able to open up a simple text editor and just write a .NET app. right? So that's that. OK, another kind of similar thing is one-shot tool execution. So this is .NET tool exec. It's also, there's a short name for that, DNX. So if I go back into here, let's see if this ever completed. It did. I just got to see it. Now, I think it blew it up because I was in, there it is, yeah. Cat, CS Proj. Am I doing it wrong? I'm not, here. I could do code. I can't really hear folks telling me the right answer. .cs proj. Oh, it's going to open there. It's because I was in PowerShell, right? And but go, oh my goodness. File.cs proj, here we go. Yes. OK, great. But I got distracted because I was trying to show you DNX. So let's get out of there. Let's get out of there. OK, so I want to do DNX. Here, let's clear the screen. So what this is doing is it's executing it's doing one-shot execution of a .NET tool. So honestly, this is learning from / stealing from / competing with NPX, right? If you've used any MCP in the past, it's almost always run using NPX, and that's because NPX can, in one line, one-shot execution of an NPM package. And so it's able to grab a package. If you don't have it, if it's cached on your disk, then it'll just run it. And then just run it. So this is running .NET say, which is a .NET tool. So it's just running that. So again, this is an example of, hey, kind of neat, I guess. But where this lights up is in these MCP packages. So if I create an MCP, I'll pop over to our example of how to build an MCP. And if we look, there's a walkthrough of how to build and publish on NuGet. And if we go down to the end, after we've published, you see these magic words right here, command DNX, right? So an MCP is just a console app. In most cases, you can do remote hosting with server streaming, et cetera, but almost every single one you'll see these days is a console app using standard I/O. And so what's happening is this blog post walks through doing it. You create a simple console app. You annotate it with things that say, this is an MCP server tool. This is what you do. These are the different things that you can run, et cetera. And then you publish it to NuGet, and then other people are able to install it and run it. And when it runs, it basically says DNX, and then it just executes the thing. So the back-end thing of that, if I go to NuGet, if I look at MCP, so this is a cool little feature that requires .NET 10 because of that DNX support. But you may not have seen this on here. If I look at filtering on MCPs, right? These are all these different MCPs that you can create, right? Tim Hewer built one, right? So sample.NET MCP server. So this is an example. So I could, on my computer, I could install this. So good job, Tim. He's building away. That's pretty cool, right? So this is just a standard MCP, and this goes in and explains how to set that up. So this is an example, again, of how all these things kind of feed back into each other, right? So this is an SDK feature that powers an AI feature. All right, ASP.NET Core in .NET 10. This section here, honestly, what I'm doing, this is fundamentals. We're getting kind of close to the end. A lot of the time when I talk about like what's new in .NET, then someone will say like, oh my gosh, you forgot about, is Microsoft discontinuing Blazor? What happened to Maui, et cetera, right? And it's also good just context-wise to think, yes, there are other things going on. So you will hear about AI, and you'll hear about Aspire a lot, like at .NET Conf and stuff, right? Those are new things, but your your cool existing things that you've been using and have been working for you are continuing to get new features, right? So ASP.NET Core in .NET 10, there's some security things. There's also app observability and diagnostics. Some of this is in Aspire. But there's also support directly in ASP.NET for doing things like all that open telemetry and all those things can be used directly from any kind of open telemetry provider. There's also just additional like performance and pain points. I had a bunch of slides for that, and I stripped them out because I wanted to just kind of focus on some of the main stuff. One that I'm excited about is passkey support. So the idea with this is I can just file new project, I can create an application, I can log into it, and then I can assign a passkey. So this works with, this will work with your different Windows, Mac, et cetera. And the idea is, why is this important? Well, this is a cryptographic key that's stored on your computer. And so I don't have to use a password. I could technically delete or overwrite that password, and I'm able to just continue logging in using this cryptographic key, right? So I've actually got a short little video of this with a few security tips. So step number 1, security tip is don't log in using your own email name. Log in using danielroth@microsoft.com. So that's just like phishing resistance and spam resistance. So next, once you've logged in, then you can go in and you can click on Create a Passkey. So once you do this, add your passkey. Now, this is secured by a PIN, but this also could be secured with my face, my fingerprint, any other biometrics, my phone, right? So I go through and I create that using my Daniel Roth persona, right? So now after I can give this a name, and now once I log out, so I can associate with other things too, right? All right, so after logging out, then I can still continue in this example to log in with a password, but that could be removed. Now here I can just log in with using my passkey on my device. So you've seen and worked with a lot of applications that are doing that, and I was always kind of like, how exactly does that work, right? So you can actually, all this code is implemented. So this is in just the file new project on a Blazor application. A few other neat features. So there's JSON patch support. So this is an example. This patch is more targeted than a put. So normally, like your different HTTP verbs, right? You can do a post, which creates something new. You can do a put, which replaces. But a put is a very bulk. It replaces the entire thing. And a patch is targeted. And so there are operations there where you can say, run a patch and just replace this one field, right? Just change or modify one field in this entire large, say, JSON document. And so being able to do that is just more efficient. It's kind of a niche scenario, but if you are working with updating larger JSON documents, that's nice. Blazor state persistence is one other neat thing. So this is simplifying persisting pre-rendered state. So it's a declarative model. You can annotate a field, and then it's just persisted kind of magically for you. A lot of support for things like overriding and changing things. We've done several community stand-ups on the ASP.NET community stand-up going into this. So those are a good example of where you can kind of go a little deeper. All right. Another neat thing, so we talked about ASP.NET. Here, moving on to MAUI. There are several other, MAUI generally over the past few years been focusing on stability and keeping up with the different frameworks, right? Which is already a lot of work because you've got to keep up with Android and iOS and all the different changing security things and all that. There's also support for some new control packages that are also vendor supported, which is cool. But one thing that I think is really neat, I was talking to Gerald just about this yesterday. He's around, you can chat with him more, is Aspire and MAUI. So again, I mentioned every app should be an Aspire app just about, right? And when you've got a Maui app, a lot of time they're working with a back end or working with a database, or you need some observability to figure out what's going on. And a lot of the time that can be a little complex to figure out, because you setting up a dev tunnel from your Android or iOS device for debugging can be a little complicated for getting your telemetry, et cetera, right? So, so this is pretty cool to be able to do that. And I think, yeah, so the way we set that up, your standard Aspire setup, then we're adding a project, so we're adding in that CS proj. We're creating a dev tunnel. So the dev tunnel is pretty neat, and that allows for that kind of sending back that telemetry. And so we've configured the endpoint. Okay, excuse me, this is the tunnel for the telemetry, right? That's the OTLP. But the other kind of, what I like about this is it's your kind of standard Maui, or it's your standard middleware setup for Aspire, right? So I'm going in, I can just dot with Windows, dot with Android, dot with iOS. And there's some intelligence in there where it's, if you're running this on a Windows device, it actually understands, okay, you said dot with iOS and dot with Mac Catalyst, but those aren't available here. I'm not going to, it's like it no ops that, right? So that's pretty handy. There's if you want to see more about that, you can check this out. So this is a fork off of Aspire, and I think if anyone's interested in that, there's a share. Oh gosh, they keep hiding where to get the. Where's the share link? I was trying to make the QR code go, but I don't think I'll be able to. Oh well. Cool. It's there. It's awesome. So this is, I'll just zoom in. So the trick between now and when this ships is .NET Aspire repo, and then it's the Jeff Luis Maui, and he's got a playground in there. So, cool. All right. All right, so kind of wrapping up some of those other areas, these are some of the other highlights. You know, for instance, WPF and WinForms, there's continued things being added in there. For instance, clipboard events and designer support. So it's not like a, oh my gosh, clipboard events, but it's a nice thing to have, right? So there's continual work going on there. I like to call out WPF and WinForms because they're both open source on GitHub and they're regularly updated. So I talk to the WinForms team a lot. I was a WinForms developer back in the day. I am very happy to see they keep adding features in. For instance, they got dark mode support, all kinds of like accessibility features, support for Windows 10, Windows 11, et cetera. So if you have existing, like say WinForms apps or WPF apps, like update those and you can start taking advantage of these features or also just better performance, right? Vector data, I talked to, if you want to talk in person, you can talk to Shai about that. There's more vector data support on that. One last thing as we're kind of wrapping up is tools. The reason I want to do this is because .NET 10 is a long-term support release. So I know for a lot of enterprises, they only work on the LTS releases. Is that, can I get any hands up here? I don't know, I'm in Europe, so right? Okay, cool. I'm pretty happy there. I got hands up in Europe. This doesn't always happen. Okay, so yeah, totally understood. So what that means is a few things. One, .NET 10 is a release you're probably caring about more than .NET 9. You're probably seeing or thinking about some of these features and things more than when they came out with .NET 9, right? There are some features, for instance, like DATAS or Adaptive GC, which actually shipped as a feature you could turn on with .NET 8. It was on by default in .NET 9, but we actually just did a blog post on it for .NET 10, and there's actually no new features in it, but we're like, hey, this is something that people are going to start seeing. So actually, Mayoni, who runs the GC, she posted this on her Medium, and then we asked her, and she also cross-posted it with us. But this is something where she basically said, this is not a new feature, but it's going to be new for some developers because it's on by default for the first time for you in .NET 10. New features. OK, yeah. So as you're updating your applications to .NET 10, that was it. The other thing I wanted to show you on the blog is we recently did change our support policy. So if your hand went up and you said, I only use the LTS versions, this is something to be aware of. So in the past, STS, so there was long-term support and standard term support. STS in the past was supported for 18 months, and now it's supported for 24 months. What's nice with that is it overlaps. So in the past, there was this weird kind of gap where if you used an LTS, it was actually supported for a shorter period of time than the previous LTS. So now they overlap. So if your company policy was, we only use LTSs because STS is 18 months and that's way too short, now you got 24 months, so that's a little bit longer, something to consider. But I want to kind of sell you on moving to .NET 10 using GitHub Copilot. And the reason is because it's pretty cool. So in the past, we've had Upgrade Assistant. And Upgrade Assistant is just code that was built on patterns and said, here's how to upgrade your NuGet packages. Here's how to convert a controller to a newer controller, that sort of thing, right? This is showing, with the Copilot Upgrade Assistant, it actually it has steps. So it's AI assisted, but it actually has support for understanding, OK, here's what's in your project. Here are the different things. OK, you're in an MVC project, so we could update you to these different versions. Here it's saying you could do 8, 9, or 10. I've sped this up a little bit, but now it's saying, like, OK, let's find out what's in your repo. You probably want to work on a branch, right? So it's integrated in with your version control. So, kind of better practices than just kind of like, hey, let's update in place. And then it goes through, it figures out your branch, go through, and just start updating things. We're not going to wait and watch through all of this. But what I've found in the past is updating manually, especially if you wait every 2 or 3 years, is a lot of work, and it's kind of hell. Updating with Upgrade Assistant is a little easier, gets a lot of the kind of standard things, update your NuGet packages, get the project to maybe build, get it closer. And then I have to go and fix annoying things like, OK, this was a .NET Framework app, and it used bundler minifier, and now all my static JavaScript and CSS is broken, that sort of stuff, right? With Copilot, it's able to understand that. It's able to actually run that until it works. What I recommend for a pattern is, first, make sure you have good unit tests. That could include like Playwright as well, right? Have your tests in place. And if you don't have tests in place, you can make Copilot write those for you too, right? So you get your tests in place on your older version and make sure all your tests pass, and then you run the upgrade. I recommend upgrading using Visual Studio 2026 Insiders. The tool, like, it works on 2022, but it seems better integrated into 2026. Also, 2026 runs side by side with 2022. So I don't know. I can't really think of a downside. Unless you have, like, your company says, absolutely, you may not, just do it anyhow. I won't tell. So some neat things here is it's gone through while I've been talking. It's basically completed this, right? So you've seen that it's updated in the center. Another thing that I didn't point out is it actually updates by building a markdown plan partway through, right? So it analyzes your application, and it says, here's what's in your app. So probably somewhere around here, it went through, and it created this execution plan, right? So this execution plan we're looking at we looked at in the rendered view, but it's actually written in Markdown, and I can change this. So here, for instance, it says excluded projects. No projects are excluded. I could go right in there and say, exclude the API project, right? Or I could say, I'm using MS test instead of XUnit. Make sure that, like the tests are converted and updated, right? So I can go through, and that's all integrated as part of this update plan. So that's kind of my pitch for updating to .NET 10. And what is going on? Can I go to the next? There it is. I'll skip over this. This is also a neat feature in .NET 10, which is support for benchmarking and profiling. So this is built in. I love it, but doesn't really have time here. So we are right at time. I'm going to point you to .NET Conf, which is November 11th. Again, mine is the excited little school kid that I just love all the features. Maybe you like some, maybe you didn't like others. What you're going to see at .NET Conf is going to be super polished. You're also going to see examples of customers that have been, testing and using some of these. But so from beginning with Aspire and AI, and then to those framework features and the tools, it's awesome. And that's the end. Thank you very much.